Welcome everybody to the webinar about the diversity in clinical trials. We're going to share today European perspective on the topic of diversity in clinical trials. And I would like to introduce the panelists that have joined us. I'll start with myself. My name is Agata Bloswick, and I'm a Chief Clinical Research Operating Officer at Biomapas. I have nearly 2 decades of experience in clinical research, mainly in large CROs, overseeing from project delivery to operations in various field and therapeutic areas. Being based in Europe, I have worked on many global projects, and so the concept of diversity and the topic of diversity in clinical research is very close to my heart. I would like to also introduce George Ramishvili. He's a Chief Executive Officer at New Hospitals Limited in Georgia. He oversees operations at new hospitals, relationship with healthcare and regulatory authorities, and other key operational functions. Previously to his current position, Dr. Ramishvili worked at Roche, holding various positions in Georgia, including sales, marketing, country management roles, focusing on improving patients' access to innovative medicines. In the last 3 years with Roche, he also served as general manager for Roche Kazakhstan affiliate. So George brings in the developing country patient care experience into this conversation. I would like to also introduce Leah Isabel Prue. She's an R&D patient voice partner at Roche. Leah is scientist by training and has been working at Roche for over 10 years. In her role as patient voice partner, she's working closely with project teams and early clinical research to ensure patient communities are an active partner with teams are discussing clinical development strategy, taking into account a deeper understanding of patient and caregiver needs. Leah brings, therefore, to our conversation today the patient voice perspective, as this is what she supports in building the long-term partnerships between patients, industry, and other stakeholders. I would like to say hello to Benjamin Benskin. Benjamin works as Vice President Strategic Partnerships at Lightship. He's a senior commercial and operational executive with over 20 years of industry experience. As the Vice President Strategic Partnership at Lightship, he's responsible for leading and growing strategic commercial relationships with pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and clinical organizations to deliver hybrid and fully virtual clinical trials to address inequality in clinical trials. So Ben brings to us, to our conversation today, the option of innovation in the space of delivering clinical trials to the underserved communities. And last but not least, Evelina Davidoniana. She's a head of global regulatory affairs at Biomapas. Evelina has over 15 years of experience in regulatory affairs. She has extensive knowledge of regulatory environments and deep expertise in regulatory strategies, external engagement and advocacy activities, and therefore she brings the experience of the regulatory elements and the interactions between the pharmaceutical industry and the regulatory affairs. Welcome everyone, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. So with that, Evelina, since it all starts with the regulatory background, would you like to take us through what are the key regulatory requirements related to diversity in clinical trials in the US? Let's start from the beginning.
Thank you so much, Agata. Good afternoon. I'm Evelina Davidonienė. I'm delighted to welcome you joining us today for this highly anticipated webinar to talk about diversity in clinical trials. And representing regulatory area, I would like to indeed talk a bit on high level, touch base the requirements for the diversity for clinical trials in the US and the EU. And we'll start with saying that diversity in clinical trials is essential not only for meeting regulatory requirements, but also for ensuring the integrity of research outcomes. Individuals from racial and ethnic minority groups and other diverse populations are often underrepresented in clinical research. And this lack of diversity is concerning because of people of different ages, races, and backgrounds may respond differently to medical treatments, which can lead to poor healthcare outcomes and missed opportunities for life-changing therapies. Talking about the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA encourages diverse participation in clinical trials and issued a guidance entitled Diversity Action Plan to improve enrollment of participants from underrepresented populations in clinical studies, which is continuously updated to ensure the enrollment of participants, especially from historically underrepresented groups. The guidance aims to assist sponsors of specific clinical studies involving drugs, biological products, and devices in submitting their diverse action plans. Diversity action plans submission goal is to ensure that individuals from underrepresented groups are included in these studies, ultimately improving our understanding of treatment responses and healthcare outcomes. Speaking about Europe, of course, obviously population is incredibly diverse, covering many languages, cultures, and health experiences. Thus, again, diversity is crucial for ensuring that the efficacy and safety of a drug are understood across different groups. However, there are no specific guidelines in the EU on diversity in clinical trials. Thus, I will list and cover the guidelines and regulations that are referenced by European Medicines Agency. These describes the strategies that should be developed when planning clinical trial study populations, and are mainly three ICH guidelines to address diversity. ICH A4 focuses on ethnic factors when accepting data from other countries, highlighting the need to understand genetic and cultural influences on drug effectiveness and safety. There is E17, provides a framework for conducting clinical trials across multiple regions, ensuring data from diverse populations can be harmonized. And E8, updated in 2022, emphasizes the importance of including diverse participants in trials. Of course, individual member states may have their own diversity regulations. However, for example, Germany, France, they follow European Medicines Agency recommendations. The primary goal of these guidelines is to ensure that the trial participants represent a demographic of the populations that will use the medications. This means including a mix of genders, ages, special populations if it is likely they may receive their medicines, such as elderly, children, patients with liver or kidney impairment, pregnant women, lactating women. Then these populations must be studied in either a dedicated clinical trial or subset of large trials. Foreign data can be used if it is representative of the same population in the EU. However, we all know that genetic and cultural can influence how people respond to treatment. Therefore, it's essential to consider these factors when evaluating the safety and effectiveness of the drug as well. And for the conclusion, I would say that looking ahead, we believe that we will see a much more stronger emphasis on diversity regulations as stakeholders become more aware of healthcare inequities, and as the research in this area evolves, we may expect more requirements aimed at ensuring that all populations are represented. And with this, I'm kindly handing over back, Agata. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is a really good introduction. So obviously, this is all driven by the regulatory, but I think the question is it just a regulatory requirement, or is it something that we should do even if there wasn't a regulatory requirement? So with this, I would like to ask Leah. Leah Prue, would you like to share a little bit with us? Is that, why does it matter? Why does it matter that it's not just a regulatory, it's something we should do? Talk us through that part of the patient perspective.
Thank you very much. And I also want to thank the organizer for having me participating in this webinar. So as mentioned, my name is Leah Prue. I'm a patient voice partner. And what this means is I'm working with study teams, so teams that are designing clinical protocols, teams that are designing implementation of clinical trials. I'm working with them to make sure that we're also bringing the patient community perspective into the design, into the implementation, so that whenever we can, we're going to proactively address some of the challenges for people to join in our clinical trials. I just want to reflect back on what Velina mentioned, and just add a little bit more for those of you who likes to have more, I'm going to say, data and numbers. If we look historically when it comes to clinical trials, 80% of the participants in clinical trials are actually representative of 8% of the global population. That telling you the lack of diversity we have seen historically. And when we go more specifically into genomic research, 94% of the material we're using when it comes to genomic research is actually coming from people from European ancestry, European descent. So we also have a lack of diversity when it comes to this type of material for discovery for preclinical activities. From the patient perspective, why this is important, why it matters, and my colleague mentioned it very clearly, that what we have done up to now has created those, I'm going to call them gaps, has created those gaps in our own understanding of the disease, of the condition, of preventing factors, and the treatment effectiveness across the population of people living with a condition or living with a disease. So what we have is very good understanding for a subset of that population, but not for the whole population. If you're pushing this reasoning a little bit further, what we're seeing is that those gaps are actually impeding the quality of the healthcare decision-making. The ability to consult people properly, like regarding treatment and next steps, so that we can reduce the risk, have the optimal treatment responses. And from our side, from the industry, from the sponsors, this is also creating this gap when it comes to developing more effective medications or solutions or interventions, because the information, the data we're looking at is again focusing on a subset of the overall community. So what we're working with our clinical team, with our study team, is to understand who is the community that is living with this specific disease, with this specific condition. Where are they? What is their need? What is their challenge? Are they trusting clinical trials? Do they understand what it is? What is the obstacle for them to be part of a clinical trial? Are they even being offered a clinical trial as part of their treatment plan? And those are questions. Oftentimes, we're going to have our own assumptions. Assumptions are a good starting point, but they need to be confirmed when we're working, when we're collaborating, when we're partnering with patient communities. But again, you have to make sure that the representative of the community that you're partnering with are representative of the whole community, not only a subset of the community. And I think the more we're going to have those discussions, the more we're going to bring those diverse voices early on in the process, when we're designing the protocol, when we're thinking about our sites, when we're thinking about the countries where we want to go, the more we're going to be able to create that diversity upfront. And the more this is going to help us fill those gaps that I've just mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned the opening a global discussion. So how is the FDA requirement for diversity action plan opening up that global discussion when it comes to inclusive research? We know it's a US requirement, but obviously it has implications on all of us globally. So walk us through this. What's the global impact?
I have to say the first impact for me is raising the awareness. Because like you mentioned, this guidance is specific for US. But in our cases, we're designing global trials. We're going to go in different countries. And having to do the exercise specifically for the US is also raising the questions, what about other countries? What can we do? You know, looking at the population that we want to invite in our clinical trial, what can we do globally so that we are getting that diversity? For me, and it was mentioned clearly initially, the FDA, the draft FDA guidance is becoming a requirement. This is a phase 2 requirement, so that this is being in place for the phase 3 trial. The other thing that was interesting, if you want to be ready to have this diversity in your phase 3 trial, you have to start way earlier the discussions. Because what we need to remember is there's a trust component when it comes to clinical trial. And trust is something that you're going to build on a longer term. It's not a one discussion and then I'm going to trust you and I'm happy to work with you, right? This really is this time component. I think why, to go back to your questions, why the FDA guidance, how is it influencing what's happening at the global level? For me, it has opened a discussion. It has bring the topic on the table. It has made people realize this is something that is happening across, not only in the US, but we have an idea how we can work on it in the US. Let's discuss together how we can work on this globally in different countries, what we can do at the national level to be more diverse. And also, let's not wait until we're designing the phase 3. What can we do today that will help us be there, be present, be diverse, and it's going to be the beginning of our phase 3.
Okay, so I'll pull on that thread a little bit. So you said that we should work together. So how can sponsors work with the FDA when it comes to diversity action plans?
If you look at the draft FDA guidance, what for me is coming across very clearly is communication. Don't wait until it's the moment for you to submit your diversity action plan. Have the open discussion, talk with them, present a draft plan to them, and make sure that if you have questions, again, I'm coming back to the assumption, if there's question, go and talk with them. And on your own side, make sure you're also bringing the point of view and the perspective of different stakeholders when you're building your plan to go to the FDA, not only work on your own assumption.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a really good place to start. The communication is really critical here. So what is the sponsors, what is the role of the sponsors in recruiting those diverse populations? Where to start? What are they, those diverse populations, right? In our European perspective, help us design this moving forward.
I think there's different angle we can take. I mean, I mentioned earlier, which countries are you going into? Which sites will you partner with for your clinical trials? I think this all goes back to know who is the population, like who are the people living with this disease, this condition, and where are they? So there's some countries when you can have prevalence incidence data, like US is one of them, UK is one of them, I think Canada is one of them. You may not have it in every country, but if you talk with patient community, we have those, European umbrella, US umbrella, global umbrella. If you talk with them, it will help you understand who are the people living with the disease or the condition and where they are. I think for me, that's a great start because that's helping you when it comes to country and site selection. And then if we go a little bit more into the detail of the protocol, the eligibility criteria, those criteria that are telling you if you have this is an inclusive criteria, then we can move you on to the next step. But then you also have the exclusion criteria. So if you have those, we won't move you into the next step. And what we've seen oftentimes is this kind of habit of copy pasting them from one protocol to the next. But that's giving you the same population as well, right? And I think what is important where we are and talking with investigators, talking with physicians, talking with colleagues and with patient organization, is to try and switch this mindset, trying to be, how can we be as inclusive as possible? And what are the key exclusion criteria for that specific population? Rather than start with, okay, very narrow when it comes to inclusivity, let's switch how we're looking at this. And it's not a matter of relaxing in the eligibility criteria. It's to make sure that we have the key one in place while we're remaining inclusive for our clinical trial. I just want to make sure that distinction is clear, right?
Yeah,
we're not
absolutely.
saying to send a trial for everyone. We're saying have a look, challenge yourself. Can you justify every one of those exclusion criteria? And if not, then maybe it's good to think of removing it from your list.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good place for me to ping it to Ben. When we talk about designing it, right? So what we've heard so far is, yes, it's a regulatory requirement. It's also something we need to do because that helps our patients, and that we need to bring that representation. Then we need to be very conscious about it, and we need to think about it early enough in our development plan, and we need to plan for various strategies. So Ben, the question to you is, what kind of strategies we can build to enable the diverse population in that broad diversity definition: ethnic, racial, geographical, sex, sexual orientation, gender, or otherwise underrepresented? What innovations we can implement to drive those service solutions?
Thanks very much, Agata, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to present today. I'm very pleased to talk about this topic and something really close to my heart. Just one very quick disclaimer. The views I express here now are my personal ones and shouldn't be necessarily taken to be the official position of Lightship. So that out of the way, in answer to your question, Agata, this is really kind of building on Lee's point about really thinking about what one wants to achieve and then designing for success at the beginning. So really thinking at the protocol concept stage about what is the objective of the clinical study, what data wants to be collected. Is it necessary to collect all the assessments? Is it necessary to collect all of the data? Maybe nice to have, but is it essential to actually achieve the goal one is intending in the protocol? Once one's been through that assessment of the protocol, is then thinking, can we build in flexibility to each of the visit locations about where those visits can be conducted? Because one of the big barriers to inclusion in clinical trials, for be that racial, ethnic, geographic, is actually, do you need to have all your visits in the clinic, in the hospital? A number of assessments can be done elsewhere from the clinic, and thinking about this up front really enables to build that ability for more people to access trials. So really at the beginning is having that consideration and not trying to retrofit to an existing protocol solutions when you realize there may be a challenge in meeting the diversity action plan goals. And then once you've gone through that stage, is then thinking about multifactorial solutions. As also Lee was talking about, different situations in different countries and within countries, and certainly regions, have different solutions. So it's not just a case of single spot tech solution with using eCOA or eConsent is going to resolve the issue. It may need to be one solution here. You may need to have an option to really change your location of visits using home nursing, for example. It may be there's a call to do telehealth. And these are all in line with the regulations which differ across the European Union and then beyond. So really thinking about a specific solution, then coming up with different strategies in order to address them. Digging in a little bit more into hybrid approaches, and I mean hybrid is where you have visits in the hospital and where you may have visits at home, at the office, or maybe somewhere else that's more convenient for the person. That enables us to address one of the key challenges of inclusion in trials, which is really inflexibility in visit schedules. Really means that people can't participate. Maybe people can't hold down a job and participate in a trial. Giving some flexibility to conduct in an office or other suitable location has enabled people to participate. So it's really thinking holistically about the solution, the goals, first of all, and then the solution you want to apply. And that may be different depending on where you want to run the clinical trial. Yeah. I'll take a quick pause there, Agata.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So I think that this is interesting what you're saying, is because I think it's in line with what Leah said, which is simplification, right? The more complex procedures, the more complex inclusion-exclusion criteria, then the more complex study procedures, the more exclusionary our protocol is going to be. So again, not to get rid of all the nice to have testing or procedures, but I think what we're hearing here is a theme, right? We overcomplicate our protocols that might lead to potentially excluding groups of patients that, as you mentioned, might not have enough flexibility in their day or enough time in their day to come to the clinic to do that. So I think this is really interesting what you're saying. Take us a little bit into the future. What opportunities in the future we might see to continue on that path?
Thanks, Agata. I think when one looks at the future, I think like other industries, I think that we're going to evolve more into optionality for patients. Once we have more technological and other capabilities, service capabilities, I think giving people more opportunity to participate in a way that's more convenient to them is where success lies, and really drilling down into the theme of understanding why we don't have representative trials at the moment, and then how we want to get there. Addressing that ability for people to be more flexible at shorter notice to participate differently in a clinical trial is where we're going to be. That's going to be a challenge as an industry to get there and to give people that option, but I really feel that having more choice for people, participating in a way convenient to them, is really going to help enroll clinical trials, enroll more quickly, but also address the challenge about retention so that people find it more convenient to participate and then participate for the duration of a project. And I think as we evolve as an industry, we have guidances in different countries moving to regulations. That's really going to help to drive that focus on achieving scientific goals, but also giving people the opportunity to participate in different ways.
So we talk about the enrollment of patients, and that's obviously one of the, like, you can't get diverse studies if you don't enroll patients at first, but the execution is also about retention. So what options for execution we have to, first of all, build that recruitment and then the retention of patients? What are the options we can choose from as a menu when we're planning our clinical trials?
So I think it's, again, looking back at the protocol about giving that flexibility in how to have those visits, whether they can be done by telehealth people follow up, whether nurses can be sent to people's homes to do assessments in the homes or in the office, really helps to build that retention. But also it's about maintaining the relationships between patients and the physicians who are running trials, and also the teams who work on them. As one moves further away into a hybrid model, it's very important to maintain a relationship, be that through a remote study coordinator, and maintain that contact that maybe is challenged by doing things more remotely. That will help address the retention of patients on clinical trials. I think the other way to look at it is giving people the ability to participate somewhere other than home or in the clinic. I think that gives flexibility, particularly when people's lives evolve over the course of clinical studies over a year, 2 years beyond, is actually doing trials in a different way, maybe offices, maybe schools. Everyone evolves in their life. It's actually giving people the ability to participate and addressing things that come up which do challenge retention sometimes.
So very often we think that technology is the answer, right? And I think from what I'm hearing, what you're saying is not just technology. There has to be also the low-tech solutions, which is just simple logistics, be it helping with the patient transportation or delivering the visits into patients' home, not necessarily through technology, but through actually coming to patients to see them in home, or a third place between a clinic and a home to allow for those opportunities. I think that's a really good call out here, because very often we keep thinking technology and moving everything into remote will help with diversity. But then when we think about accessibility of technology, and it's again a price point, and it might be also an age thing. And I think that that's a very valid point here that you're making. Okay, thank you. So I think with this, I'll move to Dr. George Ramishvili. So you're head of the hospital in Georgia, which is a country with great experience in clinical trials. So more than 2 decades of trials being conducted in Georgia. It's still considered a developing country. Can you share with us what diversity means in your country?
First of all, thank you for invitation. Instead of let's say presenting myself, I will present a little bit the environment in Georgia in regards of clinical trials. So our country is participating in clinical research since more than 20 years already. And during this 20 or 25 years, we have developed quite a good network of investigators. We have very competent project managers, CRA, study coordinators. There are a lot of small CROs, homegrown CROs, and the affiliates of big CROs operating in our countries. And all this is possible because of quite transparent and let's say favorable regulation. So the approval process from Ministry of Health takes just 20 calendar days. And this has been one of the, let's say, market entry initiative incentive for many organizations. And well, after that, we have this field quite developed here. So when we speak about diversity, basically, first thing that comes to my mind is an economical factor, which is quite important. So for me, as for a manager of the healthcare institution where we treat the patients, we always try to compare the healthcare service that we try to provide to, and that we try to do our best, of course, we provide to our patients. And basically the economics does play a role because, well, the country with GDP per capita of 5,000 can only try to provide the healthcare that country with GDP per capita of 50,000 does. So there is a difference. There is a difference, and this difference is also, well, if we speak about economics, we also need to speak about the state healthcare expenditures, which could be from 8 to 12% in Europe and even more. And in developing countries, it could be 3%, 2%, or even less. So, well, this factor, of course, is of quite of importance. And then the rest is accessibility of the people who are in rural areas. And in small countries, actually, it's very good. So smaller country, more accessibility you have. Bigger country, less accessibility you have. Well, then we speak about nutrition habits, and these nutrition habits are quite different in our countries. And we are considered a member of Europe, and we are, I think, absolutely Europe, but still we have quite a different diet. And well, and when we speak about diet, it's not about diet, and I don't speak about the wine, I speak about the vitamins, I speak about nutrition and nutrients and all these microelements which the patients can receive differently in our countries. And the baseline of the body and the patient's body can be different, accepting the new study drug, for example. That's my point in this regards. And then we go to the healthcare systems, and in many countries the healthcare system does not reimburse the let's say modern biotech medicines which are really helping the patients. And this is from one side is good because it is increasing the willingness of the patients to engage into the clinical trials. However, the baseline of the patient who is treated differently or undertreated, the data will be different and the results will be different in such a patient compared to the patient who has received the treatment according to the guidelines and the most contemporary biotech antibodies or immunotherapy or whatever. And well, healthy lifestyle and adherence of the patients to the healthy lifestyle is also different. I can recall that now when I look through the window of my car, I see some 100 times more people jogging in our country when it was 10 years ago. So basically 10, 15 years ago, you could hardly find a gym. Well, you could find, but it was only one. Now we have 200 per square meter. So this difference also plays a role. We can speak about hazard like a pollution of air. We can speak about pollution of rivers with antibiotics. All this plays a role. So whatever we will consider as a diversity, I think there are many factors which we need to admit that they do play a role, and we cannot ignore that.
Yeah, and that connects very well to what Leah mentioned, which is in country selection, right? When we select the countries to participate in clinical trials, we need to look at the diverse population between those countries. But we think about Georgia as a fast recruiting country, right? But we don't.
Yeah.
I don't think Georgia as a country comes up often enough to say, well, the patients are diverse even within Georgia. So I'm sure there are differences within Georgia of what the patients might be. So tell us a little bit about what diversity within Georgia, how diverse the patients are you seeing in your hospitals?
Since we agreed that Georgian patient is diverse from American or Swiss patients, then, well, we can speak about the local. But we have a lot of nationalities living in Georgia, and they are all different with their diet. They're all different with their habits and all this stuff. So it is. You cannot avoid that. You have it. You just need to admit and to pay more attention to that. So put it in the eligibility criteria or selection criteria, or my colleagues know it much better than I do. But, well, yes, we see that they are all of them are different, and we need to take that into the account.
And so what I'm trying to get at here, maybe I'll rephrase my statement more than a question, is we think about developing countries as a place to potentially get fast recruitment. I don't think we think about them often enough in designing our clinical trial protocols as a place to get diverse patients. If we take that broad definition of diversity, definitely places like Georgia, Kazakhstan, and other countries that are still considered on that developing path, I think are a good place to find patients that are diverse within Europe. And it's going to potentially help us with meeting and having more representative population in our clinical trial.
Of course, I do agree.
Okay. So we talked some time ago, and I heard that in Georgia, in remote villages, they are very often served by mobile clinics. And it kind of connected in my head with what Ben was saying about designing solutions in clinical trials that can serve patients in remote locations. So having those as a part of standard of care, it's really interesting because that's quite similar to what solutions are often incorporated in clinical trials, specifically in the US or UK. Can you tell us a little bit more about the system, how you serve patients that are in a very remote locations as a part of your standard of care?
Well, I in this case, I need to disagree, Agata, because in the small country, the only thing that you have for sure is an accessibility. So I would strongly discourage to do surgeries in a bus, which there is a provider who does the eye surgeries in the bus, but now he's doing this less and less. So in small countries, we should really, in order to have a quality of medicine or service provided, and also to have a quality of medical data collected, I would really recommend to use the big centers where the service is provided according to the guidelines, according to the patient safety goals, according to this, I don't know, the requirements that are built all around the patient safety, and we should not, let's say, sacrifice that in order to serve patient in a rural area, especially in the small countries where the accessibility shouldn't be a problem. In Georgia, you can cross all over the country within 6-7 hours by car. So, no, I would better bring patient into the clinic rather than serve him at home at this point of time. And also, I am quite when we speak about remote serving the patient with some medical services and all the remote tools which we have for that, we had quite a breakthrough during COVID. But from my perspective, as a former doctor and current administrator, nothing can replace the physical, let's say, interaction between doctor and patient. And at least it should be, let's say, considered if the distance is of 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers and there is no doctor or nurse nearby, okay. But in case you can pay a visit to a doctor, then it's better to do it physically, especially if it's a first visit. And then if we speak about follow-up visits and interviews, okay, it could be considered as well. So I'm quite conservative in this.
No, and I appreciate that, because that's the perspective from you being a practitioner of healthcare and seeing every your country, your healthcare system. I think that's a very valuable, and I think that also shows how there isn't one solution for each country or for each population of patients. What works in one country is not necessarily a good choice for another. So thank you for that opinion. I don't think I have more questions from myself, but I see there are some questions coming in through the Q&A box. So if you have some questions and you haven't submitted one, please go ahead and submit, and I'll start with picking a few questions to begin with, and then hopefully we'll receive some more and we can have a conversation going. So I'll start with, this is not a question directed to anybody specifically, but the question is, are all of those diverse recruitment activities you mentioned increasing the cost of running the study? I don't know, Leah, Ben, do you want to start there?
I don't mind starting and maybe hand over to you, Leah, for your view. So I think it's looking at the challenge in the round. The goal is to enable people to participate more easily, more diversely. That should drive quicker enrollment into the trial. If you make it easier for people to participate, more people are going to enroll more quickly. And if you enable, through these innovative solutions, people to be retained, then the trials will ultimately finish on time. And that will save in the clinical development plan budget a lot of budget. There will be costs one would expect up front. If you're doing things differently, try new solutions, you may front load costs. Designing for success at the beginning will realize you bigger savings later on. And we see that when we work with partners is set the project up in the right way, use the right innovations, you spend your budget up front, but actually you realize cost savings on the end for the development program. I hand over to you, Lee, if you want to add anything.
I fully agree with this. And I think this is where we're seeing this impression of it's more cost, it's more time. It's when people have not planned for it up front. It's when you're not recruiting and you need to course correct and you need to amend and you need to find new solution and fit them in an already existing protocol. This is where the time and the costs are increasing. If having diversity is part of your recruitment retention strategy, it's part of your protocol design. You're talking with patient communities as you're talking with investigators when you're designing the protocol. If this is embedded into the process, taking account into your timeline until you are going for recruitment of the first trial participant, I'm with Ben on this. You should see, in the longer term, you should see saving and you should see trial finishing on time, if not earlier. This for me, this is about starting slow to go fast after, not going fast, trying to course correct, and then hoping you can still walk after.
And kind of a follow-up, because there was a second question about time, exactly, but I'll kind of rephrase the question about, does it take longer time to recruit patients? But should we pause recruitment of certain patient groups to allow recruitment for the ones who may be more difficult to recruit and therefore potentially jeopardize the timeline of the whole study?
I think this is a very interesting question. And I don't have a straightforward answer, because I think if you're going in that direction, you need to be able to justify and explain why, right? And that's something that needs to be agreed up front, and it needs to be discussed with investigators so that people who ultimately will be told, oh, we're sorry, we hit the maximum participant in this specific group, we need to be careful in offering them the trial as a potential solution as part of their treatment plan. So I don't have a black and white answer here, but I would say if this is the path that people are choosing, you need to be able to stand behind your discussion. You need to be able to explain it, why it makes sense. And yeah,
If
yeah.
planned well, I think what you're trying to say, if planned well, we shouldn't be in the conundrum, and we shouldn't have to make those decisions, right?
But I mean, we're talking about people, right? So saying that I need 5 of these, 5 of these, 5 of these, I need more than this for me to be in agreement with that, right? I need why 5? Why are we stopping it there, right? Because the idea is to be inclusive. So I think that this is a discussion that needs to happen. I know we're seeing it in some cases, but usually there's a scientific rationale behind, right? So because we're thinking of safety, we're thinking of different endpoints. So I would say make sure you have this discussion and make sure there's a sound rationale behind.
Thank you. So there's a question, Ben, I think to you. Speaking about patient retention, do you think well-arranged and fast reimbursement as well as good patient travel arrangement could help to retain patients?
I think absolutely, Agatha. I think barriers to inclusion is when not being reimbursed for your cost to get to the clinic or not having upfront stipends is a real barrier for some cohorts of society to participate. If you have jobs where you can't take time off to work, you have to travel distances, addressing those challenges are really important. And as quickly as possible, you can reimburse, ideally upfront for people's costs. That's really going to help enroll more people and retain more people on trials. So absolutely.
Thank you. So I think this is for Leah, for you. When designing clinical trials with a focus on inclusivity, how does this impact the inclusion and exclusion criteria, particularly for certain ethnic groups based on their genetic background? Are there specific considerations or challenges in ensuring that genetic diversity is adequately represented while maintaining the scientific rigor of the study?
This is a very good question. I have to say the way we're looking at it is it again start early when it comes to pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic, so those famous PK/PD study. So that you when you're looking at those specific studies, you're exploring and you're making sure you have that diversity already there from the beginning. And this also goes to your inclusion criteria. There is, if you go in the literature, it is known that for some specific markers, for some specific genetic variants, they will be different when it comes to race and ethnicity. And this is where, earlier we were discussing, make sure your inclusion criteria are not too restrictive, that you're excluding people by default. So this is one of the area where we have to be careful to make sure we're not excluding because of the margin we're having. So I would say there's things we can do. We need to plan for it because you don't want to start those specific, I'm going to call them almost sub-studies when you're getting at your phase 3. You want to have that information so people can be included in your phase 3.
Okay, thank you. I have 2 very similar questions about policies in Europe. So I'll just ask one of them, but both of them are quite similar. What policies or incentives could European governments and regulatory bodies implement to encourage sponsors and CROs to prioritize diversity in clinical trial participant recruitment? I don't think it's specifically a question to Evelina about regulatory. I think it's about more practical things, right? So for all of us who are here in delivering clinical trials, what would we recommend to the regulatory bodies to implement as incentives and policies? I don't know, Ben, you want to go first? You want to give it a go? Look positive into the future?
I think it's a very interesting one. If you had a wish list about what regulatory bodies could do, I think it's how could incentivization be built in? I would suggest, and again, just personally, a more rapid review and approval and response process. I think tying something in terms of greater speed of responses from the regulators or approval timelines to meeting diversity goals or action plans, I think that would be of interest to the industry to help drive this over and above having regulations in place. That would be my thought.
Leah, any ideas here? Would you add something?
Trying to think, while Ben was answering, and I would love the idea of a wish list. I think we also have to consider specifically from a European perspective. And I think Evelina referred to that earlier. Diversity is defined differently than what we're seeing in US, right? It's broader than race and ethnicity, sex and gender, and age. Like we have a lot of socio-demographic factors that are coming into play. There's a lot of immigration. There's different like things happening in the world that are impacting people, how they're moving from country to country. And this is not being captured when it comes to clinical trial, but it is part of our diversity as a European population. So it's for me, if I could have a wish list, it would be to try and match the diversity of the population with what we're capturing in clinical trials, so we can showcase that diversity.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, and I can't believe it's only 53rd minute that we got to it, which is what elements of diversity are we capturing in CRF normally? What are we measuring as diversity? And this is what you said is age, sex, and ethnicity, race, right? And I think that's probably why the definition currently in use and practice looks like. And I think that's probably something that I would have on my wish list to expand that what we collect and how we collect that data, how we describe it in our diversity action plans, and then how we measure against it. I think that's definitely on my personal wish list. George, anything you would like to add to the wish list that we're creating here about how we would add to the diversity list?
No, I think everything was covered very nicely.
I would also add there has been a report a few months ago written by a couple of organizations talking about how we see decrease in number of countries being included in clinical trials. So I think the average number of countries have dropped by 30% in the recent years. And of course, by dropping number of countries, you're also limiting your diversity. Obviously, we talked about on the example of Georgia of how diverse patients within one country can be, but the less countries you include in the study, the less diverse populations you'll have. So I think that'll be also another thing I potentially could add to my wish list, which is keep the number of countries higher than maybe one or two. Okay, we have another few questions that came in. We have about 5 minutes. I just want to make sure we get to all of them. So if you still have a question and you haven't submitted it yet, now is your time. But the question is, how do we balance the need for diversity with the principle of equity, ensuring that vulnerable populations are not exploited? I think, Leah, it's back to you.
That's an interesting question. I think for me, the diversity in the clinical trial is to be there to also build capabilities and support the equitable access to healthcare after. So I'm seeing this as a continuation. I'm not seeing this as a tick box. I need to have X% of African American, X% of Caucasian. So I'm seeing that those are the gaps we have identified earlier. If we have those people as part of the clinical trial, this is helping our understanding of how to design better treatment for them, how to answer their need, and how to support them when it comes to treatment plan and healthcare access. So for me, this is really a continuity. So I'm not sure that I understand the link with exploitation. I don't know if one of my fellow panelists would be able to help me with that part of the question.
Yeah, I'll give you an example that was very practical example just about 3 years ago. So when the full-scale invasion on Ukraine started, we found ourselves in Europe having a lot of refugees, European Ukrainian refugees within Europe who were clinical trial participants. And on one hand, we were working very hard within our jobs to keep them in the clinical trial, to keep offering them healthcare. But at the same time, when we thought about from the ethical principles, they became vulnerable populations. So this is the balance, right? Because on one hand, we wanted to make sure we simplify the relocation of the patients and we allow for continuation in a different country. And we were organizing all of this, but we wanted to make this entry barrier as low as possible so that it's not stopping them from continuing in a study. At the same time, they were vulnerable population. So it had to, we had to take care of them even more than we would have if they stayed in their home country. So I think that's this balance, right? How do we remove the barriers for entry and then recognizing when, they actually are vulnerable population that we are trying to lower the entry barrier, right? That's how I understand the question. Is this what we're seeing potentially?
Okay, thank you for this. And I agree with this. And this goes back to the question that Ben was answering earlier, like about this transportation and proactively providing support to lower those barriers. And for me, this goes in the same direction. And I fully agree with this. I think it's also up to us as sponsors to recognize this and see if there's additional support that is needed at different point in time, and to be ready to either proactively or reactively address those barriers.
Okay, thank you. Ben, anything you would like to add to this one?
I think we probably answered it. The only thing is whenever we look at financial or other incentives is make sure that they're not too far the other way to incentivize people for the wrong reasons. But I think getting that balance right is important.
That's a very valid point. Thank you. I don't really have any more questions coming in. I think we've answered, some of them are more or less repeats. So thank you very much for all the questions you submitted. We will share the recording and answer any questions that are left directly in email to the individuals who submitted them. Thank you very much for joining us today. This was a webinar about diversity in clinical trials with the European perspective. And I would like to thank all my panelists here for spending the hour with us and all of the attendees who joined us on the call. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for bio.